Welcome to the virtual ocean dialogues hosted by the Friends of Earth, Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum, the first ever completely virtual global ocean event. I am Magdalena Skipper, Editor-in-Chief of Nature, a weekly multidisciplinary scientific journal. It is my great pleasure to be the host and moderator of this session, focused specifically on global priorities for ocean protection. Even though you can't see me owing to some unforeseen technical difficulties, I am truly delighted to be here. Overall, the dialogues are bringing together leaders from business, governments, civil society, and the scientific community from around the world. The aim is to share and scale innovation and solutions so that their benefits may be accelerated worldwide. The outcomes from the virtual ocean dialogues will be presented to the hosts and organizers of the UN Ocean Conference to be held in due course in Lisbon, Portugal. As you heard and saw in the opening video, our focus in this session is on ocean protection, and all life on Earth, including us, depends on a healthy ocean to thrive. Yet the ocean is under a serious threat that is reducing its capacity to stabilize our climate, provide safe food, and support jobs and economies. We already know that marine conservation has been highly beneficial for people, marine life, and climate stability. It has demonstrated the remarkable resilience and power of regeneration of the ocean. Therefore, protecting the ocean seems to be an obvious priority for all sectors and stakeholders to address. Today, we will hear from our expert panelists about what they think the global priorities for marine protection should be so that the state of the ocean can be improved and we and the generations to come can look forward to a sustainable future. So this is a dialogue session. So we strongly encourage you all to contribute to this important discussion by responding and sharing your questions with us as the session proceeds. To do so, please take your phone and go to slido.com and use the event code #OceanDialogues, or simply scan with your phone the QR code that you should see now on your screen. So to begin the session, I would like to now move to a video message, a pre-recorded video message from the President of Palau, Tommy Remengesau Jr.
Dear friends of the ocean, Ali from the Republic of Palau. Palau has been fortunate to have been one of the few countries in the world with no identified cases of the coronavirus. As in many other places in the world, commercial flights have been suspended and our borders are effectively closed. Global lockdowns have helped keep our people safe, but they have also reduced our tourism revenues in over 40% of GDP to zero. This matters because our tourism economy and ocean protection go hand in hand. When life under our pristine water thrives, that is how we attract visitors to dive and see it for themselves. Tourism and protection are part of the same sustainable ocean economy, and when one is undermined, so is the other. The high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, which I co-chair, recognizes the importance of sustainable ocean-based tourism to support employment, livelihoods, and ultimately sustainable development. Ocean health is indeed a necessary condition for life on this planet. Its phytoplankton generate most of the world's oxygen. It is also the largest sink for global CO2 emissions, where an estimated 93% of global CO2 resides. And for large ocean states like Palau, the ocean remains central in shaping our cultural identity and influencing social activities, which form the fabric of our island societies and coastal communities. Human activities like plastic pollution and the burning of fossil fuels are bleaching reefs, destroying coral cover, and altering weather patterns to the detriment of all human communities. We know why we need to protect the ocean. Because it supports us. Because it feeds, sustains, and employs us. We protect the ocean in order to prosper from it. So how do we protect the ocean? Palau is a large ocean state, and protecting our ocean is a responsibility we proudly accept. This year, we began the implementation phase of the Palau National Marine Sanctuary. 80% of our exclusive economic zone, some 500,000 square kilometers, is now a no-take area. We know that such protected areas foster greater marine biodiversity and strengthen resilience to climate impacts and provide respite for fish stocks. They are public goods with benefits well beyond Palau's waters. The sanctuary is an outsized contribution to the global protected area target. We know that most other countries will not be able to achieve this scale of protection. So, making our efforts at ocean protection effective and successful means that you, other governments, businesses, and civil society alike will have a responsibility to help us to make this work. So far, some of you have risen to that responsibility with partnerships for monitoring and enforcement of our EEG against illegal fishing. Some of you have helped develop economic tools to incentivize sustainable tourism infrastructure. And some of you have even visited Palau to contribute to our ocean economy. Ocean protection is not an imperative just for island states. It is an imperative for everyone because everyone benefits from a healthy ocean. I hope that you can see all this at work and step up to the challenge of doing more at the Our Ocean Conference 2020 in Palau, which has been rescheduled from August to December due to COVID-19. Since 2014, the Our Ocean Conference has been a major stage from which to announce new commitments for ocean protection. Palau's Marine Sanctuary was one of these commitments announced back in 2014, a commitment that has now become a reality. At the Our Ocean Conference 2020, we intend to show how local action drives global ambition for our ocean, how ocean protection is a central piece of the sustainable ocean economy. And we hope that at the Our Ocean Conference 2020, you will rise to this challenge with new protected area commitments, with partnerships to support protected areas, and with ambition for ocean action that rises to the crisis of health that our ocean faces. Let's make our recovery from this pandemic a blue one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the President of Palau for this message and the important reminder that ocean health is a necessary condition for life on this planet, and that protecting ocean health is an imperative for us all. This message reminds us how much ocean states such as Palau depend on the ocean in many different ways. The ocean is central for their cultures and economies. It creates jobs and improves livelihoods, and it secures food, of course. Palau's leadership in protecting the ocean is commendable, and the creation of the Palau National Marine Sanctuary with 80% of exclusive economic zone as a no-take zone is indeed an outstanding example in the global context. Indeed, the president ended his remarks in a powerful call for a blue recovery post-COVID-19 crisis. We wish the best to the government of Palau for the upcoming Our Ocean Conference 2020, which will take place in December in Palau. Before we proceed to the statements of the high-level panel and the follow-up discussion, let's have a quick look at the results. We will actually skip this part, and we will move to the panelists themselves. Keep your questions coming throughout the session, and we will actually come to the questions and then the polls after the presentation from the panelists. So I would now like to welcome our panelists and start a discussion with them to see what, in their view and from their perspective, are the global priorities for marine protection, what they should be, what solutions already exist that can be scaled up to improve the health of the ocean and to continue supporting humanity. A warm welcome to our panelists, Enric Sala, Explorer in Residence at National Geographic Society, Elizabeth Rima, Acting Executive Secretary for Convention on Biological Diversity, Benj Sykes, Vice President for UK Offshore and Head of UK Market Development, Consenting and External Affairs, Ørsted, and Ruth Matumbo, Marketing Manager at Wild Oceans. It's my pleasure to begin this discussion today with Enric Sala, Explorer in Residence at National Geographic Society. He will share with us some findings from his latest research to start off the conversation. Enric.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. Hello, dear friends. So we have two questions here. First is what type of protection we need, and then what are the priorities globally for protection. And we know that no-take areas without fishing, like the National Marine Sanctuary in Palau that President Remengesau just mentioned, are the most effective way to restore marine life. And I would like to show you an example, because most people have not been in a marine protected area. Most people have not seen with their own eyes what happens when we protect an area. So can we have the first slide, please? So this is a place in Mexico, Cabo Pulmo. In the mid-90s, the local fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that instead of going after the few fish left, which is what would be expected, they asked the Mexican government to create a national park in the sea, a 70 square kilometer no-take area. When we return 10 years later, this underwater desert had become, next slide please. What had been an underwater desert was now a kaleidoscope of life and color. We saw it come back to pristine in only 10 years, including the return of the large predators like this grouper, snapper, sharks, and jacks. Next slide, please. And you know who else is thriving now? Those visionary fishermen who are now making far more money from diving tourism inside the protected area and better fishing around. And we have seen this miracle, I have seen this miracle personally all over the world. Next slide, please. We have seen through our research that on average, no-take areas that are fully protected MPAs, are able to restore the biomass of fish to levels that are over 600% higher than in unprotected areas nearby. Whereas areas that are partially protected, these MPAs that allow fishing, some types of fishing within their boundaries, are not even able to double the biomass of fish. And in these fully protected areas, not only the fish are more abundant, but they are also larger, which means that they produce a disproportionately larger number of eggs, which helps to replenish the areas around. But not only marine protected areas that allow fishing are not able to fully restore marine life, but even worse, in Europe, the abundance of target species like rays, sharks, skates are lower within some MPAs because of the fishing that is authorized within them. So if you want benefits for the ocean, for fisheries, and for people, fully protected areas, no-take areas, are clearly the best solution. They are savings accounts with a principal that we set aside that produces returns over time and compound interest. If we eat away from the principal, well, you don't need to be an economist to know what will happen to that account. I think we're done with the slides. Thank you. But today, the problem is that despite these benefits, today only 2.5% of the ocean is fully protected from us. And this is mostly because because there is a conflict with fishing. But the data from no-take areas shows that MPAs can actually benefit fisheries around them. So to go from where we are today to where we need to be, we cannot think in silos anymore. Focusing on biodiversity priorities to identify the priorities for conservation is the right thing to do, but it is not sufficient. We also need to address fishing. We cannot just prioritize areas where there is little conflict between both. We need to prioritize areas that produce multiple benefits. And we have ongoing research that shows that fully protecting more than 30% of the ocean strategically, the right 30% of the ocean, would deliver triple benefits. First, it would preserve unique and irreplaceable biodiversity, marine species and ecosystems, and all the benefits that we obtain from them. Second, it would boost fisheries globally, meaning that global fishing catch would actually increase if we ban fishing in the right 30% of the ocean, but not moving that fishing effort elsewhere. That fishing effort would vanish, and it would not be necessary because the catch per unit effort actually increases around these protected areas. And third, that protection would also reduce the carbon emissions caused by bottom trawling, which disturbs a large amount of carbon in the sediment on the seafloor, which otherwise would be locked there for millennia. That's how I think we'll get to 30% protected by 2030, by breaking that wall between extraction and protection, and make everyone understand that the cause of globally declining fish stocks and diminishing returns are not marine protected areas, but overfishing. Fully protected areas can be an insurance policy, not just for food security and for marine biodiversity, but for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enric, for this evocative presentation. I never thought of marine protected areas as savings accounts before. This is an important reminder of the multiple services that marine protection helps enhance. In addition to biodiversity conservation, perhaps the obvious one, it contributes to food security, storing carbon, boosting economies and jobs, as well as supporting livelihoods through all of this. Thank you again. Elizabeth, let me turn to you. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Rima. Elizabeth, at a critical moment for the nature agenda, you stood up and accepted to lead the Convention on Biological Diversity. Only a few months before, it was time to agree on a new global framework for biodiversity. Unfortunately, COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the timeline and forced the postponement of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD to 2021. Looking at the nature agenda, can you now share with us some of your thoughts on the role of the oceans in this context? What should the next critical priorities be to ensure an ambitious and strong outcome that can be followed by effective implementation in the decade to come? Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. And many thanks first to the World Economic Forum and the Friends of the Ocean Action for convening these innovative sessions, which I'm pleased to be part of. We are speaking today about global priorities for the ocean protection, which even for the CBD is such an relevant and important topic for its parties. A major focus of our work at the CBD has been setting global targets for biodiversity and working towards achieving those targets. Such goals and targets are not just statements of hopes and dreams. They are carefully considered reflections of an ambition, of the ambition of the national governments for collective global vision for better future. And in this case, a future to which the survival and well-being of the community is intimately tied with. So global goals and targets tell us where we need to go and how to get there. Whether or not we actually walk the talk, that is up to us to decide. For the CBD or for the convention, ocean protection, area-based conservation have long been the focus of our work. Aichi Biodiversity Target 11 on area-based conservation has been one of the most impactful targets for the ocean, which has catalyzed enormous political commitment and action, and informing also the adoption of the SDG or Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Target 14.5. But as the Aichi target and the SDG 14.5 are reaching their end date, end of this year, 2020, the parties to the Biodiversity Convention are also looking to the future and are currently negotiating the successor of the Aichi targets, namely the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework will be a framework for the entire global community, not just for the CBD parties alone. It will contain a set of goals and targets that are intended to put the world on a path to 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Parties are negotiating targets on area-based conservation, including how much area should be covered, as well as the qualitative aspects of conservation. But we must also keep in mind that the marine protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures are to achieve the goal. And just like any other tools, they must be used in the right context in order to be effective. This is why the 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is not only discussing target focused on actions that need to be taken, but it is also looking at the outcomes that will be needed and where marine ecosystems need to be 10 years in order to achieve the 2050 vision. Future goals for ocean protection must be accompanied by financial resources and capacity development, particularly for developing countries. Global goals and pronouncements will be meaningless if they will not be realized with action on the ground. So another important factor for success will be a much more inclusive approach to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. We must look beyond the traditional ways of working and our traditional alliances. We must be seeing a new spirit of collaboration across sectors and stakeholders, which will be essential to protecting the ocean and ensuring that the ocean deliver what human beings need to survive and thrive. During this period of pandemic, we've clearly seen the importance of coming together for the benefit of all. The pandemic has also demonstrated that biodiversity loss and human disturbances of ecosystems are increasingly linked to the risks of disease spread. Nature is the basis of human health, and that is why One Health approach, which recognizes the connection between human health, animal health, health and resilience of nature, will be key consideration to the post-2020 global biodiversity. Likewise, we need to strengthen the links between nature and human health, also in other fora, in the climate change discussions. We'll have the Biodiversity Summit in September, but also the Ocean Conference next year to ensure that all of this realize the vision of building back better. You will recall that this was to be the super year for the oceans, likewise the super year for biodiversity. But let us not allow the pandemic to take the winds out of our sails. We will have the chance to put right the ship and to put the world back on a path to sustainable future. Let us seize this opportunity. And therefore, the postponement of our meetings this year should not be a deterrent to our focus. The pandemic has clearly demonstrated the links between human health, the links between also species conservation. Our human activities, human actions have pushed animals out of their comfort zone to come into contact with human beings. And therefore, this has enabled the biodiversity agenda to be high on the state of discussions going on. And likewise, the ocean agenda is still on the discussions. Despite the fact that the major meetings have been postponed to next year, and that's why we have this series of meetings, including for the ocean, going on during the year to maintain the momentum, to underline the importance of marine conservation, area-based conservation, and to maintain and also further emphasize the importance of nature for human health and the planet. So, dear colleagues, I equally take this opportunity to invite you all to also join the deep dive session on the post-2020 framework that will take place in it with the UK government. Hope to see you there also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this very important perspective. International collaboration and an inclusive and sustainable approach should indeed become a priority to further boost the integration of ocean conservation in business practices and allow different sectors to walk hand in hand in this endeavor. Before we move to the next panelist, a quick reminder to our audience to continue sharing their questions on Slido. Some really important and insightful questions have come in already. Just as a reminder, if you have some questions, please take your phone, go to slido.com and use the event code #OceanDialogues, or simply scan with your phone the QR code that you should see now on your screen. So now let's move to a business perspective. Benj Sykes from the offshore wind company Ørsted is our next panelist. Benj, could you share your perspective on this? What are the roles and responsibilities of ocean-based industries like Ørsted towards ocean protection and health? You have been also exploring specific solutions for your business to integrate ocean protection elements. Can you tell us more about what you have learned from these experiences? Benj.
Magdalena, thank you very much for that introduction, and also thank you to Enric and Elizabeth for some very interesting comments, which I hope I can pick up on during the course of the next couple of minutes. Many of you may not know who we are, Ørsted, so very quickly, we are the world's leading offshore wind developer. We are very passionate about the sustainable use of the oceans to tackle climate change. And we have heard a number of comments already about the challenges that the oceans face through human use, and in particular from climate change. And I think what I'd just like to touch on a little bit is where we're coming from as an offshore wind company. What is the importance of offshore wind for making sure we tackle the existential threat to the planet, and in particular to ocean biodiversity from climate change? But then what are we doing? What are we proposing to do? And what are we already doing as an industry to make sure that we can deliver sustainable development, truly sustainable development that embraces and enhances biodiversity at the same time as tackling that threat of climate change? Just so you know, Ørsted used to be an oil and gas company called Dong Energy. We transitioned completely away from oil and gas, and we are now totally focused on delivering a world that runs entirely on green energy. We believe that's something that we not only have to do, but that we can do, and that we can do it in a way that is sustainable for the environment where we operate. In fact, we were just last year rated as the world's most sustainable company, which was very nice. But we don't underestimate the challenges of delivering sustainable development in the oceans. We know that the oceans need protecting. They are fragile in places, and we must take a very considered and collaborative approach to developing green energy at sea. We know that if we don't do that, we will be missing a huge opportunity to tackle climate change. Just to put it in context, offshore wind has the potential between now and 2050 to tackle something like 10% of the world's CO2 emissions across the whole spectrum of energy use, whether that's electricity, transport, and all the other ways in which we consume energy. Offshore wind on its own can take out 1/10 of those emissions. So it's a huge potential prize to protect our societies and our oceans from the ravages of temperature increases. And we can already see around the world some of the impacts that climate change is having on our marine ecosystems. So we have transformed ourselves as a company with that very clear mission. So what is Ørsted's role? What is our industry's role in ocean stewardship and marine protection? It's a very important debate, because we know that the ocean provides us all with extensive resources and critical solutions to many of the challenges that we as society face today, not just climate change, but food security, job creation, and livelihoods in coastal communities around the world. And yet human pressures and unsustainable activities we know are already having important impacts on the health of our oceans and the people who live in and around them. Ocean-based renewable energy, as I've already said, will be critical to limiting global warming, and is one of the key ways in which society will be able to reach the target set in the Paris Agreement and achieving zero emissions. And we already see this is a technology that is having a real impact from wind farms like the one you see behind me. But we know that the offshore wind sector can't single-handedly drive forward solutions. We need a societal response. We need to work together. Societies, governments, and industry need to be aligned on reaching this target in a cooperative and a collaborative way. We have a shared responsibility to all take the actions to secure a healthy ocean and reach net zero emissions to tackle that climate emergency. And what we see is there is no inherent conflict between those two objectives. By 2040, we believe the accelerated deployment of offshore wind will mean that many coastal nations right across the globe will be powering their societies and economies with low-cost, sustainable offshore wind power, not only providing clean energy, but also providing clean air, very important for our societies. And at the heart of this challenge, we think there are two levers which we believe will unlock the opportunity, and we're already starting to see in some countries. Firstly, as I say, close collaboration and partnering between societies, governments, and industry. And secondly, through that, delivering a much more strategic and coherent approach to spatial planning. We've talked about creating 30% protected zones. I've been working in the United Kingdom to advise the government on highly protected zones in the UK. And this is a sector which really needs to take action to get more coherent spatial plans in place, and to do it quickly, because that means we can ensure we deliver sustainable ocean economies and sustainable oceans at the same time. We must protect that marine biodiversity as we develop. So in terms of specifics, we're doing some really exciting things, looking at providing new ecosystem support services through our wind farms. We work very closely with other marine economic users, such as the fishing industry, to make sure that as we develop our wind farms, they're able to continue their livelihoods in sustainable ways. We've heard a lot about marine protection through no-take zones, and I think that's an area that we perhaps will come on to in the Q&A, which will be very interesting to discuss. I think offshore wind farms offer a great opportunity to create sanctuaries for the marine environment, and be very interesting to hear thoughts from the panel on that when we come to the discussion. I think I'll leave it there. There's lots more to be said, so I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benj, for your remarks and for showcasing the potential for business leadership in ocean conservation. I, for one, did not know about the past of your company, and I'm sure there are some really interesting learnings associated with that very dramatic transition from an oil and gas-based business to renewable wind-based approach. In general, it was very interesting to hear what the possible solution there may be, and how indeed we have to work together to look forward to the solutions being scaled up across the board. So let me now move to our last panelist for today, and that's Ruth Matumbo. Together with her peers, Ruth has an impressive track record of success in contributing to increasing ocean protection in her country, which is South Africa. In less than 2 years, the youth movement for marine protection in South Africa has contributed to increasing the total marine protected area coverage from 0.4% to 5%. This is an incredibly impressive result. Congratulations. Ruth, could you tell us more, and also look to the future, about what should the next focus for the youth community be to continue along this successful path? Ruth, over to you, please.
Thank you. So as Magdalena has said, I am from South Africa, and right up until October 2018, we only had 0.4% of our oceans or the waters around South Africa protected. And just to put it into perspective for those watching who don't have much of a background on this, whatever room you're sitting in now, you can imagine 0.4% would probably be a little corner in the room that you are sitting in now, which means the rest of the room would be vulnerable to whatever danger. And that is the exact danger that South African waters were in. And knowing how the youth globally is viewed sometimes, millennials are viewed as the microwave generation. But one thing that's amazing about the youth is that we have a sense of urgency. And when that's channeled in the right direction, we can effect change. So before October 2018, we had we did a couple of things as a youth group in South Africa. We had a protest asking government, where is the 5% that you have promised that South Africa would do to protect at least 5% of our oceans? So where is that? That's what we were asking. And we also got involved in a couple of environmental conferences and events where some of the youth were sent to engage with leaders. And we had a direct line with those in the Department of Environmental Affairs. We also have used social media, which is an amazing tool, not only to have a direct line with leaders, not only local leaders, but world leaders, but we also have used social media to connect with very, very influential voices. One of those being Shailene Woodley, who's a Hollywood actress and part of the Ocean Unite network, where we got together and made a video clip of all young South African ocean lovers, just encouraging government and once again, just stating that we love our oceans and let us protect it. Because as the youth, we will inherit whatever state of the ocean is left to us. After realizing that we have an impact, we can make an impact, we started writing letters to our then Minister of Environmental Affairs, the late Edna Molewa, just stating our support of government to reach that 5% goal. And on the 24th of October 2018, government declared 5% marine protection, which was a win for the country and a win for global marine protection as a whole. I think going forward, there are three things I feel that the youth in South Africa, as well as around the world, can do together. Three things being, we need to unlearn, we need to learn, and we need to do. First, we need to unlearn the lack of care for the ocean. We need to unlearn whatever horrible traits that we have inherited, attitude towards the ocean. And we have seen that it has taken such a long time to protect the ocean, and we need to unlearn that terrible behavior trait, and we need to change our behavior. Once we unlearn this, we need to learn more about our marine environment. And it's wonderful that in South Africa now, in our school curriculum, it is now a compulsory subject to learn about the marine environment, which is wonderful. So whether the youth like it or not, we will need to learn about it, because we know that every second breath we take comes from the ocean. So if our lives clearly depend on it, it's something we need to constantly be learning about. So I'd also like to express appreciation to our education department for seeing how important marine protection is and including it in the school syllabus for all learners across South Africa. We also need to learn about our waste footprint. And sometimes if we live in areas that are landlocked or countries that are landlocked, we think that we don't really have an impact on the oceans, but we do. We really do have an impact, because the clothes we are wearing, the gadgets we are using are either transported to us through the ocean. The ocean is a food source. So understanding that, we need to change our behavior. So that means instead of telling each other to recycle, we need to actually just reduce our consumption, reduce our production, consume less. And that's how we will ensure that the ocean is sustainably used by all. And lastly, after learning, we need to do. We've seen scientists from decades past, and we will see scientists decades to come, putting together evidence. And we've seen a lot of evidence. The main thing is we need at least 30% marine protection by 2030. And now that we know that, we need to actually go ahead and do. We need to implement it. And for the South African government, for example, that got up on a global stage and said that we will protect 10% of the waters around South Africa by 2020, I think it's safe to say that our South African government needs to do exactly that. And the youth is there to remind our government that we have exactly 6 months to fulfill that promise that we made.
Thank you very much for this, Ruth. It was truly inspiring, your remarks. I never knew that this generation was referred to as the microwave generation, but I'm learning with each speaker something extracurricular in addition to our focus here. I was really struck by you emphasizing the importance of social media, which can be sometimes trivialized. But this, everything you spoke about, is a wonderful example of youth perspective and how the really incredible, impressive results can be achieved, the ones that you described for South Africa. Thank you very much for your perspective. So before we move to the Q&A session, I would like to engage all of you in the audience. And so let's turn to the Slido. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a dialogue, a discussion. In a minute, your questions have been coming in. I'll turn to them in a minute, but let's turn our attention to the question which you can see now on the screen. Let's take this poll. The question before you is, based on what you heard today, what is the most urgent priority to increase and improve ocean protection? Is it political will? Is it business solution, science and research, public mobilization, increased financing, or is it all of the above? And I have a feeling that we may be showing the first. Never mind. You are voting. Right now. Okay, so let's take a look here. So the question you are voting on is, besides nature conservation, in what other areas can ocean protection have the biggest impact? And so very clearly, the vast majority of you feel that it is indeed climate change mitigation, with food security as being second highest. In many ways, it's a really interesting and important result, because of course, all of these interlock with one another. Climate change mitigation will in turn feed into providing food security, creating much better resilience to extreme events, and improve livelihoods, which of course may also come from sustainable tourism. So thank you very much for voting. There you are. Climate change mitigation has come through fast as just over 70%. So I'm going to turn to the Q&A session now, and many of you have been bringing in questions as we've been going along. So let me move first. Perhaps a question for Enric, since we started with that. There are in fact two questions that came in that also interest me. And so one of them asks, where do you think the world, where in the world do you think we should be focusing our efforts for protection efforts? Is there one area that you think we should prioritize? And linked in my mind to this is a second question, and that is, isn't there the risk of relying too much on marine protected areas? We do need to sustainably manage the rest, which is probably even more important. Enric, would you like to comment on these 2 points? So where in the world is there a particular place that we should be focusing on in terms of protection? And then what about these other areas outside of MPAs?
Okay, sure. So in terms of where, our research shows that 96% of the problem right now, well, there are two main things affecting the ocean: global warming through ocean warming and acidification, and then overfishing, right? Which is the largest scale hunting operation on the planet. So the problem is mostly within the 200-mile exclusive economic zones of countries. Right? The areas beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas, produce only 4% of the global catch. So most of the fishing effort, most of the degradation of the marine environment is happening within countries' EEZs. So this is where we are focusing our research efforts, and this is where, actually, in terms of practicalities of implementation of protected areas, this is where it's easiest, because most of the vast majority of protected areas, more than 99.9% of the area protected in the ocean, is within countries' EEZs. That's the first one. The second question is, of course, we need fisheries to be managed well, and we need aquaculture to be developed responsibly, because right now it's not sustainable. The thing is that we cannot pretend that protected areas are going to solve all the problems of the world. You know, there is no single silver bullet, right? It's a silver buckshot. But marine protected areas are absolutely necessary as one of the tools to complement smarter fisheries management, and many others, right? Because we know that it doesn't matter how well you manage you think how well you manage your extractive activities. As long as you keep extracting marine life from the ocean, it's impossible for marine life to restore to its full capacity, right? It's again the analogy of the savings account. You have a savings account, the larger the principal, the larger the returns. So this is why we need to have at least this 30% of the ocean, which would produce a net benefit for all the other activities, even if we didn't change the current fisheries pressure. That's the beauty of this, that the easiest thing to do without reforming fisheries management globally to increase food security is to protect more than 30% in these strategic places. But of course, we need to solve the problem of fisheries management, which is a real problem. I heard the Director General of FAO speak before this morning, and he has his own sets of alternative facts. Because the global fishing catch has been declining since the mid-90s, and 2/3 of the fish stocks are experiencing overfishing. And this is not because of protection, which is now only 2.5% of the ocean fully protected. This is because of overfishing. So yes, a big problem. We have to manage our activities in the rest of the ocean, but we need much, much, much more than the current 2.5%, which is really globally insignificant.
Thank you. So the next question, I'm going to direct at Elizabeth, and I will warn that Elizabeth is not an easy one. Enric may wish to come in afterwards. In fact, anyone on the panel, if they wish to comment. So Elizabeth, the following question has been asked. We've seen 20 or more international treaties, guidelines, and codes on ocean protection, but the ocean health is still in decline. Why is that?
Thank you for the question. I mean, indeed, that question applies to also many other treaties. The problem for most such treaties is clearly on enforcement. These treaties, when they are signed and adopted, obligations is on the parties, on the countries to take specific measures for the improvement of the theme of that convention. So a lot of national action needs to take place in terms of implementation and enforcement. Not that enforcement is weak because they want it to be that way. There are issues of limited capacity, so unavoidable circumstances makes it difficult to implement or fulfill those obligations under specific treaties. It could be issues related to capacity development. It could be financial resources for enforcement. It could also be lack or inadequate political will to actually take measures to implement and then enforce that particular treaty. So in short, that's what I can say. In addition, of course, unfortunately, that the number of treaties out there is also increasing by the number, and that also makes it difficult for particularly developing countries, small island developing countries, least developed countries to really be at speed to implement all the many obligations of the treaties for which they have ratified or acceded to. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good points, very important points as well. We're going to stay with the marine protected areas, and the next question is rather specific for Benj. The question is, can offshore wind farms be combined with no-take zone to protect the marine environment? What is your view, Benj, on this?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I think the answer is probably yes. And I think it's part of a wider question, though, that I spend a lot of time discussing at national and transnational level in Brussels for the European Union, as well as also for the high-level panel, the work I'm doing for sustainable oceans. Because I think this is a question, I hear a lot, we have a lot of talk about fishing and no-take zones, and I think it's really important that we are clear when we're talking about fishing and when we're talking about all human activity, because I think there are types of human activity such as offshore wind which deliver against, you know, that priority of tackling climate change that we've just heard about, but can also provide places where the marine environment can recover. And I see there's another question I noticed about, you know, the impact of offshore winds on the marine ecosystems. Of course, all human activity has an impact, and we have to make responsible choices about where we build offshore wind farms, but they can offer, I think, an excellent opportunity to provide particularly protection from bottom trawling, which we know is damaging both from a benthic perspective, but also from a remobilization of carbon-rich sediment perspective. So there's a number of reasons why you might want to say, okay, we can do fixed gear, but not trawling. So I think we need to take a more joined up approach to spatial planning. There's no doubt we need some highly protected marine areas where everything is prevented, so we can keep or restore key parts of the biodiversity collection that we have across the world. Those are important, but I think also another question about, you know, what's the point of marine protected areas that aren't highly protected? I think it's about targeted protection and making sure that we are targeting sustainable biodiversity outcomes and not targeting specific things that we want to happen or not happen. So yes, I think it's a very long way of saying, yes, I really do think there is a way of combining those. And it's one of many ways in which this, I referred to integrated marine spatial planning. That's what it looks like, frankly. Thank you to Dave for the question.
Thank you very much. I think I will circle back to this question in a minute, but I did want to bring Ruth into the question session now. We have youth leadership and youth partners, and I think each one of you in your presentations spoke about the importance of an inclusive way forward, and including all the partners working together in order to achieve our goals. So my question to Ruth is, how can the youth partner with global organizations together and with governments to achieve 30% ocean protection by 2030? You already have some very powerful examples of what you've done, but now looking forward, how do you see that partnership between the youth and global organizations and governments?
So I'd just like to say from the get-go, looking at what we've all experienced as the world through COVID-19, we've seen how the World Health Organization has set guidelines in order for us to slow down the spread of the coronavirus. And I've seen through that how countries who've cooperated have actually helped to slow the spread within their countries, which shows me that collaboration, global collaboration, can happen. It really can happen. And I think as the youth, we don't have to sit back and wait. We've got social media, which is powerful. There are so many wonderful movements that are already in place around the world that we can join. And I'm happy to share a couple of social media handles after this for any young person who's watching now who'd like to make a difference, to join some of these movements. And the amazing thing about this is you actually get to have a seat at the table for decision making. You can attend many marine conferences, and I work for Wild Oceans, which sends quite a few young people to marine conferences. There is funding also that is available for young people to get sent to conferences. It's just a matter of reaching out, and I'm just one person out of many young people around who can help connect others who are watching today who would like to collaborate. Another amazing thing is that as young people, we understand that government has competing priorities, crime, unemployment, poverty, but as the youth and coming together, we can make marine protection top of mind. So there are so many organizations around the world that are doing this. And just to give you an example of this that's happening right now, gender-based violence was not top of mind for everybody, but the youth has made it top of mind. Social injustices, such as the recent death of George Floyd, was not top of mind for everybody, but we have made it top of mind, and we are bridging the gap as youth to see that human activity directly impacts what happens in the marine environment. And with organizations coming together, I'm just a person who lives in South Africa, but I have this platform to come and sit with you wonderful panelists from all over the world to have a voice. So we can connect with young people, and I'm happy to share that information. And marine protection hasn't always been top of mind to everybody, but as the youth, we can make it top of mind with the different organizations that are around, because lack of marine protection anywhere is lack of marine protection everywhere. So I really do believe what Enrique had said earlier on about collaboration and partnership. I fully agree with that. And also Enrique saying that that marine protected areas are like a savings account. We've seen that even with COVID-19. We didn't understand why governments were making us go into lockdown, but looking back now, we understand that, oh, they did it because we needed to slow down the spread. And so joining in young movements, we can educate one another about how marine protection might not seem like it's benefiting us now, but if we rally together, and it's amazing that we've got online networks that bring us together, we can effect change. And the sooner we buy into marine protection, the sooner we see the benefits.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. Some really powerful words about each one of us having a voice to speak out about social justice as well as environmental justice. As much as I would like to keep asking you questions, some of my own, which I have refrained from doing, and some others, we have essentially run out of time for this part of our session. So I will have to bring this part of this session to a close. I would like to thank the panelists, Enrique Sala, Elizabeth Rima, Benj Sykes, and Ruth Matumbo, for these very enlightening presentations and discussion. And also to all of you at home who've been actively engaging in our Slido poll and also with the questions. I am now very pleased to give the floor to Lord Zach Goldsmith, Minister of State for International Environment and Animal Welfare of the United Kingdom, to make closing remarks. Lord Goldsmith, we would be very grateful to hear your views on today's discussion and your points on the priorities for ocean protection for all of us to focus on in the future. Lord Goldsmith.
Thank you very much. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Apologies, I'm struggling with the technology. Oh, look, thank you first of all for inviting me to join you today. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and you've assembled a really impressive panel, some of the great thinkers and actors on these critically important issues. And before I even start, I just want to congratulate Carlos on being formally appointed the new boss of the GEF. It's just such good news. He's one of the great figures. It was an inspired choice, and I wish him all the best as he embarks on what I hope will be a very exciting and it'll certainly be a very important journey. I also want to thank the World Economic Forum and Friends of Ocean Action for making it possible for us to have these discussions on how we can boost biodiversity and improve the health of our ocean. One of my hats in government is a Foreign Office Minister with a responsibility or focusing on the Pacific. So it was a particular pleasure to hear from the President of Palau. And I want to thank him sincerely for his very inspiring message. There is no doubt that we have a lot to learn from Palau's leadership, and I'm very much looking forward to our Ocean Conference in December. As the President made very clear, maritime nations know better than anyone that ocean economies are wholly dependent on ocean health. But of course, it's not just maritime nations that are dependent on the ocean one way or another. We all are. for food security, for its role in regulating our fragile climate, and for countless ecological reasons that we haven't even begun to properly understand. COVID-19 has had an unprecedented impact on the world, and its impacts are going to be felt very, very deeply for a very, very long time. One thing it's done, I think, is it's exposed an extreme vulnerability of our species to risks that had barely been registered before. And I suspect, and I hope also, that it means our tolerance for those risks has been lowered. And it goes almost without saying, and I certainly don't need to tell this panel, that there can be no greater risk than the consequence of ravaging ecosystems and destabilizing our fragile climate, as we are doing today at a breathtaking pace. And it's not an abstract or futuristic concern. As you know, the world's poorest and most vulnerable communities are already suffering. But it's also true that climate change, the destruction of the natural world, instability, conflict, poverty, the risk of further pandemics, all these things are fundamentally linked. And that means that we have an opportunity to address them together systematically and comprehensively. Now, every country, every region is going to have to rebuild on the back of what has happened in recent months. And as we do so, we have a chance now to make the right decisions, decisions that put resilience and sustainability at the heart of the recovery. And that means making environmental sustainability and resilience the lens through which we map out our recovery. And that matters on land, of course, but it matters no less so in our ocean. The ocean encompasses over 90% of all the living space on the planet by volume. It's where life began. It's critically important for all the reasons we just heard from those excellent speeches. It is critically important for all life on Earth. Around 1 billion people live less than 10 meters above sea level. Over 1 billion people depend on fish as their main source of protein. And 1 in 10 of us relies on oceans for our livelihoods. And that's to say nothing of the interdependencies created by ever-increasing international trade. And yet, despite all that, 1/3 of marine mammals are threatened with extinction. We're on track to lose 1/4 of ocean fish by weight. By the end of the century, half the world's coastal waters have been degraded. If trends continue, the amount of plastic in the ocean is set to treble by 2025, and less than 1% of coral reefs would survive even 2 degrees of global warming. So we have a responsibility, we have a duty to act now, all of us, governments, businesses, campaign organizations, scientists, people. There are already, of course, many examples of world leadership, really inspiring world leadership. I mentioned Carlos earlier, where he's shown us how Costa Rica has been at the forefront of ocean protection. In many respects, I also think the UK has played a leadership role. Domestically, we protected an area of water almost twice the size of England, around the United Kingdom. Our blue belt of marine protected areas around the overseas territories is on track to protect an area of the ocean roughly the size of India. We're backing mangrove restoration projects in Madagascar, Indonesia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, each of them storing carbon, protecting people from storm surges, and of course supporting fisheries as well. We're investing up to £70 million to support the Commonwealth Clean Ocean Alliance, with 33 countries already working together to tackle plastic pollution in the ocean, including, I'm delighted to say, our newest members, the Maldives and Nigeria. And we're building a new £500 million Blue Planet Fund, which will help us to protect and to restore fragile marine ecosystems all around the world. And we're determined to go much, much further at every opportunity, seeking international cooperation and putting nature-based solutions at the heart of ocean recovery, from salt marshes to sea grasses. As you know, the ocean has been historically underrepresented in the CBD. So I was thrilled when our Prime Minister launched the Global Ocean Alliance at the UN last year in support of a new CBD target to protect at least 30% of the global ocean by 2030. And as Enric has shown, there is overwhelming scientific advice that real ocean protection will be a game changer in turning things around for climate, for nature, and for people. But delivering that target requires real global cooperation. And so we will do all we can to help deliver an ambitious outcome from the BBNJ negotiations, not least to establish a mechanism for designating NPAs in the high seas, which, as you know, we don't currently have. Finally, I just wanted to say something about the COP. There is little point tackling climate change if we do so without also tackling environmental destruction more broadly. And clean technologies are without a doubt the future, but there can be no future if we continue to engage in industrial scale destruction of ecosystems, as we are doing today. And so I'm delighted that the UK Prime Minister has put nature squarely at the core of the UN Climate Change COP, which we are co-hosting with Italy next year. The date's been moved. We'll be working as closely as we can with the Chinese to ensure the strongest possible bridge between the climate COP that we're hosting and the CBD conference that they're hosting in a similar time frame. I think that link is imperative because the solutions for one of those conventions will overlap necessarily, if they're the right solutions, with the solutions for the other. And so it is essential that we formalize as much as we possibly can a link between the two. I want to thank you all again for making these dialogues possible and for inviting me to take part. And I wish you all good health and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Goldsmith. As we just heard, if we continue as we do now, we have no future, and yet we should remember that we have a voice, but we also have a duty. We are now at the very end of this dialogue. Thank you very much to everyone again for the participation. I would like to remind all of the registered participants that the virtual ocean dialogue on ocean protection is not over with this panel. It'll continue. In fact, there's a break of 15 minutes, and then there are some very interesting deep dive discussions that you can now see on your screen, or you should be able to see in a minute. To join these deep dives, please reconnect to Toppling and access the next session that you would like to attend. Meanwhile, I would like to encourage you to continue sharing your thoughts and questions and comments on Toppling or Slido to stimulate further exchanges and discussions amongst the peers. Thank you very much to the panelists, to everyone who joined us. Goodbye. Thank you.